All right, now joining us, we have NFL on CBS announcer as well as college basketball on CBS announcer, and NBA on TNT announcer, and the voice of the Brooklyn Nets on the Yes Network. We had a Sun Noah on a couple weeks ago. Now we have Ian Eagle. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no, Noah told me I had such a good time with you guys, so I took the plunge. It's great to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you. Yeah. So you obviously had a big path to the to becoming to where you are right now today, going to Syracuse, and doing great there, winning the Bob Costas Award for best sportscaster. I want to know like your whole journey, how you got there, the journey where you are now.
Woo! Now, how much time do we have on the broadcast?
As much as you need.
No, thanks, guys. I had an interest in this at a very young age. I was probably 8 years old, and I told my parents that this is what I wanted to do, and both told me, then that's what you'll do. They were really encouraging. This is 1977. This was certainly not considered a popular vocation at that point, but I knew that I had an interest in sports. I knew that I had a little bit of the gift of gab. I had a performance gene in there. My parents were both entertainers. My dad was a comedian, an actor, a musician. My mom was a singer and an actress. So I just thought this would be a great way to make a living. But at 8 years old in the 70s, there was really not much that you could do about that other than calling fictitious games on your bed using baseball cards, or recreating an event in your shower where there were often very good acoustics, so the sound was very good. You were very clean afterwards, but ultimately that was the extent of what I was doing. It wasn't until I got to Syracuse that I got serious about it. I worked for multiple radio stations. I interned for Mike Tirico, who was working at the CBS affiliate locally in Syracuse. I ended up working a lot, and I immersed myself in it, got an internship at WFAN Radio in New York in between my junior and senior year of college, and ended up going back to FAN when I graduated in a behind-the-scenes role, but knowing full well that I wanted to be on the air one day, and just did everything in my power to improve myself, to take it all in through osmosis. And I almost looked at the FAN job as graduate school in many ways, an extension of what I was doing at Syracuse. And then along the way, I caught a lot of breaks. I had a lot of people that believed in me, that trusted me, and I got opportunities, and I made the most of those opportunities with each step.
That's awesome.
Wow.
I just have a side question. So we were doing some research earlier. Is it true that you and also your dad were in Xerox commercials?
Yeah, my dad was in Xerox commercials.
Okay.
I was never in a Xerox commercial.
Oh, okay.
My dad being in a Xerox commercial helped put me through college. So there is a connection there. That paid him money, and then that money went to Syracuse University. My dad went on a streak in the late 70s, early 80s, where basically every commercial he went up for, he got. Like 50 commercials in a row.
Oh, wow.
It was insane.
Wow.
And he was on a serious hot streak. My dad was corpulent, which means fat, chubby. And he used that to the best of his abilities. He had a cute and very appealing look to him, a great smile, terrific facial expressions. So he rode that magic carpet ride as long as it could go, and he ended up working for Xerox beyond the commercials, but in a personal services capacity, some years up to 220 days a year, traveling the country for Xerox as an ambassador. Wow. And it ended up being this incredible chapter of his life. I have been on some commercials. I did the voice on some commercials, Converse, Chunky Soup, Gatorade, Pepsi. So I have been involved in commercials, but not in the role that he was in. I was never on camera, just by a voiceover or play-by-play role.
I do love the fact, though, that we went from aspiring broadcasters calling games in the shower to I know I'm not alone because I've told my friends like this, and like, oh yeah, I do the same thing, is calling when you play Madden and you turn off the commentary and you're calling your own game.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And when I was growing up, it was a bit more primitive, but there was a thing called Atari that broke through in the late 70s, early 80s. And again, it was not high quality, but it was something. And I do remember turning the volume off and calling the games myself. And then there were some other consoles that came out that were actually much better graphics. There was a thing called Intellivision, which you can Google it. At the time, we couldn't believe it, like that these graphics were popping up. And then the next step was a thing called ColecoVision, which could actually play Donkey Kong at home. I know this seemed insane that someone would look forward to something like that, but I'm telling you, for all of us that would spend our quarters at the local corner store that happened to have a video game, that was huge. So there were sports games in there, and I'm envisioning it just like you did. I would just turn off the sound and do my own commentary. Or if we would play like 3-on-3 basketball in the schoolyard with some buddies, I would do play-by-play. And then eventually they would tell me they wanted to punch me in the face.
Yeah.
It was getting thoroughly annoying. I get it.
I can relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Same here. Yeah. People have told me that. Yeah.
All right. So I started out and I found on ESPN 30 for 30s Mike and the Mad Dog, and I recommended it to Josh. Mike was going to watch it soon, and you were at a front row seat to the magic behind Mike and the Mad Dog. What can you tell me about that? Because I am fascinated.
Yeah, it was fascinating and certainly worth checking out, the 30 for 30. I thought they did a good job for those that didn't grow up in the New York area, or younger guys like yourself that are just trying to understand the genesis of sports radio. This was a phenomenon. And you're right. I was there. Initially, I was the nighttime producer from 7 to midnight. Then when I started getting some on-air shifts, they wanted my nights free so that I could go cover sporting events. And they put me on an earlier shift that happened to be the Mike and the Mad Dog shift. So I was a associate producer, board op, and I did see the magic happen. These two guys had incredible chemistry. They were perfectly complementing one another and how they did a show. It was just the yin and yang of sports radio. And Mike was, a bit more of the professorial type, coming at it from an angle that someone who had jobs behind the scenes and had been researching sports his whole life. And Chris was more the wild card, the madman that could say anything. He was known as the Mad Dog, but he could say anything at any moment. He could fly off the handle. His knowledge was excellent, but his allure really came from the fact that he sounded like a caller. He sounded like every fan out there. Both of them did in many ways. And I think that's why the show had become so appealing, is that it just felt to a New York audience that this could be any two fans sitting on a corner or in a bar or in a restaurant or at a game talking sports. And that's where it really resonated with the public. So to me, that was incredibly fascinating to be a part of. Obviously, I got to know both of them very well and became very close with both of them. But then also, as I continued in my career and I started working with analysts, it gave me a little more insight into how to create chemistry, how to bond, and how to present that to an audience every single game. They did it every single day, 5 days a week. So I look back on that experience. It was very valuable, and it was definitely a building block for me in understanding the big picture of this business.
That's great, and I just am fascinated with all of the Mike and the Mad Dog stuff, because it really, as I think Tony Kornheiser said in that documentary, everybody on sports radio can thank Mike and the Mad Dog for their success. They really made it into something bigger than it was before.
Yeah, and what they did, they helped create a placard. They helped create a playbook of what this could be. the two-man show, two-person show became very popular after that because it created debate and it created sometimes conflict. They didn't always agree,
Sounds
and
like our show.
it was a good thing for the show. The fact that they didn't always agree. So, I think for many of these sports radio stations, they have WFAN radio to thank, and also the Mike and the Mad Dog show to look back on and say that helped show everybody the way on what this could ultimately be.
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. All right. So you call tennis for the Tennis Channel, basketball and football, and I wonder what's a typical game day like for those sports?
Yeah, very different. Let's take basketball as an example. 7:30 normally the games are, so you're talking about night games in the NBA. College basketball earlier, noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and then it's based on, am I traveling? Is it a Brooklyn Net home game? Am I home? How do I set up and organize my day when I'm at home and I have to get to Brooklyn, which could be about a 1 hour ride, hour and 10 minutes, depending upon what time you leave and what the traffic looks like? Or is it a road game where you're out at a hotel having dinner with guys that are on the crew and members of the crew, and then just locking yourself in your hotel room and doing work? Oftentimes for a basketball game, I've done so much of the work ahead of time that on game day, I'm just trying to put the finishing touches on what I've done. Football, you can imagine the entire week is dedicated to this one game. So I do Thursday nights on radio. The preparation is a little different than what I would do on television. Television, there's more room for stories and personal background just based on the medium, the fact that the viewer can see the pictures. And on radio, you're painting the word picture, so you're doing a lot more of a blank canvas and then filling in all the gaps with what you see, not necessarily what you prepared, although there's still preparation when it comes to that. A lot of interviews for football before you ever get to the game. You, at least under normal circumstances prior to the pandemic, would sit down with the starting quarterback and with a star offensive player and two defensive players and a head coach, and that would be part of your coverage. You would weave those stories in during the game. Tennis, completely different.
Right.
For me, in my experience, I don't live in that world 12 months a year, 365 days. I parachute in, I parachute out. So I try to get as much of the material down as possible, but I know full well that there are going to be surprises along the way. At the French Open, as an example, which I've done the last 14 years for Tennis Channel, they may tell me the night before, this is the match you're doing. And then the next day, if the session goes quickly, if another match becomes more interesting, they'll just toss us to that match. And maybe it's a match that I hadn't prepared for, at least in the same way that I would have. So you've got to just be ready for anything. And I learned that doing the US Open. I did that for CBS and for Tennis Channel, where they could just bounce you over to any court at any time. So you had to be prepared for the mystery of it. And for me, that can be a little bit off-putting because I'm so accustomed to, here's my game, here's my assignment, prepare for the assignment, do your work. This one is the unpredictable nature of it. So it can throw you out of your comfort zone a little bit.
Wow, yeah, I mean, and I want to know kind of more in depth with what those broadcaster coach and star player meeting is like. I always wanted to know about that. What do you kind of get out of that?
Yeah, so when I got the job at CBS, it was 1998, and I had done 1 year of play-by-play for the Jets, 1997. So I didn't have a whole lot of established habits because I just hadn't done it that long. I had done the Nets on radio for 1 year and then moved to TV the next year, similar situation. But this was different. This was a network job. And what I learned was that part of the contract, part of the deal that the networks make with the league is that you have access. So let's take my first ever game was Miami at Indianapolis, September of 1998. I'm told by the producer, okay, you're going to fly in on Thursday night. We're going to have a meeting with the Colts at their facility on Friday morning. And then Friday night, we'll have dinner as a group. Then Saturday, you'll have your day free. But at about 3 o'clock, we'll drive over to the Miami Dolphins hotel that they're staying in, and we'll meet with their coach, their players. So this particular example, which happened to be my first game for CBS, was Peyton Manning's first game as an NFL quarterback. So the first guy I met with as a CBS broadcaster doing the NFL was Peyton Manning. So there's a room set up at the Colts facility. We're sitting in the room. There are one major table and then chairs around the table, an open seat. Manning comes walking in. We stand up. I extend my hand. I said, hey, Peyton, how you doing? He goes, hey, Ian. Like, he knew my name. I'm like, whoa, that's pretty sharp. So clearly the PR director, it was a gentleman by the name of Craig Kelly, who had been there for many years, told Peyton Manning, hey, you're going to be meeting with Ian Eagle, the play-by-play man, Mark May, the analyst, the producer is Vic Frank, and the director is Suzanne Smith. Those are the only 4 people that were in the room. Peyton Manning sits down. We start, going back and forth a little bit, trying to keep it light initially. How's it going? How's the transition? Did you find a place to live? All those things. Then we start diving into the football side of it. And what I learned in the first 5 minutes of meeting Peyton Manning was that he was a really smart and sharp human being. I just knew it within 5 minutes when he started talking, and you realize he's a rookie. He has yet to play a game in the NFL, yet he knew his offense inside and out. He knew every player on the other team. He knew my name. So I walked away from the experience incredibly impressed. And that really has been the basis of which you work off of in these meetings from that point on. Now, most of the guys aren't as sharp as Peyton Manning, but you do get very good information. Some guys are excited to be there and they want to talk with you. Some guys, like anything in life, are not. Some coaches are excellent and they'll give you some inside information. Some coaches keep it very brief and they don't want to get too into the weeds because they don't want you to have too much information. So the 22 years I've been at CBS, you name it, I've met with them over the course of that time. And whoever's played in the NFL and has been a legitimate star, odds are I have spent some time with them in that meeting. No cameras, no microphones, just a pad and a pen. And you take notes and then you try to use some of that information on the air to best serve the audience.
I got a question here. So you work for CBS. CBS typically does AFC games.
Yeah.
So Tony Romo is obviously a guy that played NFC. So I would assume you didn't call many of his games. I would assume you called at least one, though, right?
I had 2 of his games during his career that he played in. I had a Cowboy game just as Dak Prescott had started getting the nod. But yeah, I interviewed Tony twice as a player. So
I was going to say, like, the way you're talking about Peyton, I would assume Romo, just considering how amazing he's been as an analyst, was it the same type of thing? Like, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of things, guys. It's not only knowing what you're talking about, it's having the ability to be likable while doing it. And Tony just had a likability. You sat down with him, and within a few minutes, you felt a connection. And that's based on him making you feel comfortable. Really, in those situations, if you think about it, the player and the coach have most of the power. If they want it to be a good session, they can make that decision that, all right, we're going to have a nice conversation. If they want it to be difficult, they can also make that decision. And I've had those as well. There have been some guys that just don't want to be there. And, they looked at it as a nuisance and they had their answers very curt and they didn't really answer your questions. And before you knew it, 7 minutes went by, they stood up and they would walk out. Tony was one of those guys that you could tell that the wheels were in motion when he was there, that he was analyzing the situation, that he was taking it all in. And, look, most quarterbacks get it. Most of the QBs understand that there's a responsibility that comes along with being the quarterback, being a leader, and also being someone that in that dynamic, you got to make the most of it. Again, there have been a few that were not that interested, but most of them understood what we needed and what we expected from that session.
Okay.
Interesting.
I've actually got another follow-up. If there's one current player that you've met with that you think will be a great broadcaster, who do you think it would be?
Whoa. One current.
Great question.
Excellent question. I would tell you that if Aaron Rodgers wanted to do this, I don't know if he'd be interested in doing it. If he wanted to do it, he'd be excellent. He is really smart. He's got a great sense of humor. His insight is off the charts. He would be excellent. I have no idea if this is something that he would want to do, but he would be very good at it. One coach that I could tell you that would blow people away if he became a studio analyst. Even if he did the games, I think he would be very good. But as a studio analyst, he probably would be among the best doing it right out of the gate, is Mike Tomlin. He might. Sorry about that. I know Raven Steelers.
That's interesting, though.
I totally thought that the name coming out of your mouth was Bill Belichick.
I thought I had
Here's the thing about Bill.
mind.
Bill would be good if he wanted to do
NFL
it.
100, he was amazing.
He would be great. I just don't think Bill will have any interest in one day pursuing it. But you want to talk about intelligence? It's through the roof. His memory of specific plays, of history, of NFL historical content, and then obviously his insight. But yes, Belichick would be excellent. Mike Tomlin has a way with words, and he has this knack of making everything sound very cool. So I just think he would light up the screen if he decided to do it.
Actually, do see that. Yeah, Tomlin would be good.
All right, so what we went through in a couple minutes ago was that you call tennis, you call basketball, football. What would you say is your favorite sport to call?
Oh, you can't make me pick.
I knew
You guys have siblings? Like, it would be asking me to pick between you and your siblings or my two kids. I can't do it. I really, truly have viewed it the same way throughout my career. When I'm doing a specific sport, I just put everything I have into that game, into that assignment, into that sport, whether it's TV, whether it's radio. So when I go and do the French Open, I'm in Paris for 2 weeks, I'm locked in. Those 2 weeks, everything that's going on in the tennis world matters to me and affects me, and I'm completely meshed into it.
Right.
When I'm into the football season, trust me, I am into the football season. I'm usually juggling 2 games a week, so that's a lot of preparation, a lot of travel. We'll see how it all plays out with what the country is currently going through and what sports future looks like. And then basketball, I've been doing the NBA since 1994. I love the NBA. I've always loved the NBA. And then when I'm doing college basketball in the NCAA tournament, I've been doing that since 1998. And that week of the NCAA tournament, or 2 weeks if you end up doing the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, or a couple of years I had done the World Feed, so I did the Final Four and the championship game. It's hard to beat the excitement that courses through your veins during that stretch. The fact that you're going to get upsets, the fact that you're going to get names that you've never heard before that become household names because of March, and schools that emerge, Cinderella stories. So I just know that whatever it is that I'm doing, I'm all in. That's how I try to look.
That's very interesting. I have a kind of a follow-up question. You can't pick your favorite sport, and it makes sense because you said you love all of them. But what's your favorite game that you've ever called? The one you had the most fun calling? Just one game.
On a personal level, there was a 2002 first-round series between the Nets and the Indiana Pacers. The Nets were a shocking number 1 seed. Nobody expected it. They were terrible the year before.
Vince on the team out here? No.
This was on the local Fox Sports New York at the time in New York. And I was working with Bill Raftery. We were doing the Nets games, and they went to a decisive Game 5. That was the last year. It was 3 out of 5 in the first round of the playoffs. And because the Nets had been such a doormat in so many ways in the New York sports landscape, nobody ever gave them the time of day. Nobody cared. There was very little interest. And finally, this team with Jason Kidd emerged as a real must-see team. If they lost that first-round series,
the finals that year, right?
They went to the finals. Yeah, went to the finals that year, went to the finals the next year. If they lost that first-round series to Indiana, it just would have been such a difficult hit for them to take. Everybody would have dismissed them. They had to win the series. And the fact that Bill Raftery and I were doing the game, Raf and I have been doing the games for all those years when nobody cared. It went to double overtime. Reggie Miller hits a half-court shot to send the game into the first OT. Miller dunks the ball at the end of the first overtime to send it into a second overtime, and Jason Kidd just took over in that second OT and willed the Nets to a victory. On a personal level, that might have been the most fun I've ever had doing a game because of the payoff, and the crowd was rocking at the Meadowlands. The best games that I've called have been different than that. I did that Duke Butler national championship game on the World Feed, where Gordon Hayward had a chance to win it with a half-court heat. Yeah, went off the rim. If that shot goes down, I think that's the greatest upset in NCAA tournament history. I think that's the greatest finish in NCAA tournament history, and it may have been the greatest finish in sports history for it to end on something like that. But it didn't. Duke wins the national championship. And I don't know if you guys ended up watching The Last Dance.
Oh, yeah.
But, I did Game 6 of the Utah Jazz Chicago Bulls NBA Finals. And that was Jordan's last game as a Bull, last shot, as he hit it over Brian Russell. I did that for the World Feed as well. And at the time, I thought, this might be a historical moment because everybody was talking about the possibility that Jordan may never come back for the Bulls. Now, looking back on it and watching The Last Dance like everybody else did, it really pounded the point home that was sensational, how he ended it, and also what was happening in Salt Lake City, inside that arena. It was known as the Delta Center back then. Those fans, it was as loud an arena as I had ever heard in my life, just moments before that happened. And then Jordan smacks the ball out of Malone's hands, brings it up the floor, hits the shot, and the crowd goes silent. It's a 180-degree turn. And the way that it was set up doing the World Feed, we were not on the court. Our broadcast location was in the stands. So we were basically amongst the fans. There were fans in front of me. There were fans behind me. And the horror and the sheer shock that I experienced from those fans. They thought they were going to win the title. It was only Game 6, but Scottie Pippen was so banged up that Jazz fans started already envisioning a 7th game. They're going to win the title. The Jazz will be world champions. And then, boom, Jordan ends it just like that.
Only example, and I would assume doesn't even compare, but the thing I thought of immediately when you said that is, as a Ravens season ticket holder, I'm at all the games, and the Titans game, best atmosphere I've ever seen was pregame of that first quarter, unbelievable. And by the end, it was horrible.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was one of the bigger surprises. Not that just the Titans won the game. That happens. There are always going to be upsets in sports. It's the way they manhandled them in that game and how quickly it shifted. Like early on, Tannehill's throwing the ball well. I thought, wow, they're for real. They're going to be able to hang with the Ravens. And I had done so many Ravens games this year, and I saw just how exceptional Lamar Jackson was, how that team was. I just did not in my mind ever consider the possibility that they could get blown out. And to suck the energy out of that stadium, people ask me all the time, what's your favorite NFL venue? And Seattle is awesome. There are other stadiums that you have to put in the pantheon, they're top 5. To me, and I'm not just saying this because of the Ravens jersey, Baltimore does the best job in the NFL of getting the crowd ready pregame.
Oh, yeah.
The music selection just is perfect throughout. Their game operations staff, they understand how all of this works, and the crowd is always juiced up. I love doing games in Baltimore. That game was a strange exception because the team, unfortunately, just pulled a bit of a no-show.
Yeah.
So you called that game, right?
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, I was also at the game. Same with Josh. That was probably like the best pregame atmosphere of any game I've ever been to.
By far.
Yeah, but post game, it was so loud at the beginning, and once Lamar threw that interception on the first offensive drive, I mean, it was just like dead for the rest.
Right. And what I remember, what sticks with me the most, when you're doing play-by-play, if the crowd is into it, the ability to blend your voice with the crowd, that's learned over time. Figuring out what level you can go to with your voice and then what level the crowd will be. And if it blends together, when someone's sitting at home, it can feel like a symphony where it's just perfect, the pitch, the tone. When the visiting team has all the big plays like Tennessee did, and Derrick Henry is throwing a Tim Tebow-like jump pass for a touchdown, and there's no crowd to balance out your voice, it's very much a different experience as a play-by-play announcer. So I had to figure out a way to maintain the proper level so that Titan fans understood that, hey, look, I'm into the game. I'm excited about what's happening. I'm not favoring any other of the two teams, and that's something that I view as part of my job. You're never biased. You're never rooting for anybody. The only thing you're rooting for as a play-by-play guy is a good game. That's what you're rooting for it to be competitive, to be exciting, to be a last-minute finish, because those are the moments that people remember. Those are the moments that people assign your voice with and associate you with. So when the game is lopsided like that, you get fans that react that, he's favoring this team or he's talking too much about that team. In that situation, it's a tremendous highlight, and I just want to convey the excitement of the highlight, but you have to realize there's no crowd to balance it out. So it doesn't sound quite the same. That's not just solely for a game like that. It's any game you do where the visiting team starts putting together highlight after highlight after highlight and having a great deal of success. So that's what I walked away from that thinking was the Tennessee Titans just went in there and dismantled the Ravens. And all of those highlights were really exciting. But if they happened in Tennessee or in Nashville, it would have been another level because the crowd would have changed the whole way that you interpreted the highlight.
It's going to be like that this year probably too with no fans at games.
Yeah, and I know a lot of announcers are very curious about how that's going to look and how it's going to sound and how it's going to feel. And of course, I'm in that category. I don't have all the answers. I do have experience. I've called a bunch of games off of monitors from a remote location. I did the 2013 NBA Finals on the World Feed. Miami Heat, San Antonio Spurs, Ray Allen, corner 3 to tie the game. The Heat ended up winning Game 6, winning Game 7. All of that was done from a studio in Secaucus, New Jersey. I've done tennis events. I've done golf events. I've done other basketball events from a studio. So that's one side of the equation. Those games had fans, so they could pump that into my headset so I could at least feel the energy of the crowd. The closest thing that I would have to what we're now describing with no fans, I did the Nets in the mid-90s, and they were not drawing a lot of fans. So I was doing games And guys, I'm not exaggerating. I could literally hear the conversations from the fans behind me during the action. Like,
Wow.
everything they were saying. So I'd call the play, we'd go to a timeout, and then there was a couple sitting behind me. I remember this. And they were talking about their vacation plan. So I turned around after the timeout. I said, you know, guys, I think the Bahamas is a good idea. I would do it. They're like, you heard that? I was like, yeah, I heard everything. It's
That's amazing.
very different, very unique experience.
I'm sure you weren't hearing about the Bahamas at the Titans-Ravens game.
Now,
Very loud in that one.
I heard all those. And let me tell you, in Baltimore, this is another reason why it's a great setup. But then the downside, if the Ravens aren't winning games, the way our booth is situated, you're right with the fans. Like, you can reach out and touch a fan, or a fan can reach out and touch you. So I'll give you 3 stories about doing games at M&T Bank Stadium. One, I'm doing a game with Boomer Esiason, a Monday Night Football game, and the guy in front of us is getting drunk, hammered, and I see it developing as the night goes on. And the guy's yelling Boomer's name. He's like, Boomer! Boomer! And I'm telling Boomer in our headset, I go, hey, don't engage with him. Don't even look at him, because you're just going to encourage him. He's like, yeah. You're right. So we're calling the game. Now it's the fourth quarter. This guy's he's had to have had 12 beers. And now he turns around. He's looking right at me in the fourth quarter during a timeout. He's like, hey. And I'm trying not to look at him. He goes, hey. And he holds up his phone. He goes, would you charge my phone, man? I'm like, yeah, I'll charge your phone. So I take his phone, I put it in the charger, and Boomer looks at me. He's like, I thought you said don't engage him. Like, yeah. I go, I don't want this guy going home with no bars and no battery. So I charge his phone. Second story. The Ravens are playing the Browns, and
those are always fun.
Phil Dawson has a kick to tie the game, to send the game to overtime.
What did I say?
And the kick hits the crossbar and goes straight up.
Right.
And no one's sure if it's good, if it's not good. And Pete Morelli was the referee, and he's not sure. So a guy turns around, a Raven fan, about 5 rows away from me, and he looks right at me for whatever reason, and he locks in on me. And he had long hair. He looked like he was a Viking. And he points to me and he goes, like, good or no good? I thought it was no good. That was my personal belief. And I went like, no good. And so he goes like that. Then it took them 10 minutes to figure this out. They call it good.
Right.
And the guy turns back to me and again locks eyes on me, and he points at me and he whispers the words. I mean, whispers, but I could read his mouth. He goes, I'm going to kill you. I go, me? He's like, yep. I'm like, I didn't make the call. Like, what? So now overtime happens. The Browns beat the Ravens.
Well, yeah.
And this guy never watched the game. He just stood facing me the entire. We literally had to bring security up to get me out of the stadium to make sure this guy wasn't going to. I've never seen that guy again. So that was the second one. The third one in Baltimore, when instant replay first started, everybody knew that there was a replay booth in the stadiums.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really knew where they were. And no, most people didn't care. For whatever reason, Ravens fans in that little section, some of them, not all of them, thought that we were the replay booth. So every time that someone threw the red flag, anytime that a play was being challenged, they turned around to me. And I go like, so I'd be like, I point to my CBS Blazer. I'm like, I'm not the replay. And I'm not talking like, oh, it happened once. It would happen every time.
Right.
So it finally got to the point where we had to like put up a little section to block us between the fans, because they literally would like stand up on their chairs to look in and say like, Is it what's going on? Pass interference? So yeah, that's how close we are in Baltimore.
Well, I love going to those games. That's awesome.
Yeah. Right.
All right. So you mentioned earlier about the Ray Allen shot. I didn't know that you were actually calling that from a studio, which is interesting. But we picked out two different plays that we know that you called, and the first one is the Ray Allen shot. So what was that like to call the Ray Allen shot?
Yeah, so what I remember about that experience was I had just gotten back from Paris. I had done the French Open, and the way that your body reacts when you cross that many time zones is that you don't instantly just adjust back to the time zone. So the first few days that I'm in Paris, I'm falling asleep at weird hours. Sometimes it's early, sometimes it's late. Sometimes I get really tired in the middle of the day. And then when you fly back, your body clock is out of whack. So I flew back, and then within a day or two, I was calling game one of that series. And we were doing it out of a studio. And it's very sterile. It's just me. I was working with Jim Spinarkle, who I do Nets games with, who I do CBS college basketball with. So I didn't have to worry about that part of it. Our partnership's very strong, and we could finish each other's sentences. So that part was taken care of. But the part that I didn't really know was energy level and audio, trying to gauge how that was going to work. They were sending audio into our headset. Sometimes it was really loud, like to the point where I could barely hear myself. That's not good. So I had tried to adjust it with the guy that was working at the site in Secaucus. By the time game 6 rolled around, I was very comfortable with it. I had found a rhythm, and I felt good about what we were doing. Game 1, it was still more than passable. I don't know if most people would even realize or know. I have many people even today that have no idea that I was in a studio, and I never mentioned it because nobody ever asked. But I thought for what the assignment was and what we needed to do, that we matched the energy level required for the event. And all in all, we did about as good a job as you can do covering a game off of a monitor with very little back and forth and interaction from the site. We didn't get to do any interviews. Anything I got from the newspaper or calling someone that was working the event that I knew off the internet, whatever it might be. Then the rest was left up to you.
That's very interesting, because when I was much younger, I was like, why do they fly the broadcasters out all the way to the stadiums when they could just stay at the office? But now that I've really taken a deeper dive, it's much more than just putting your mouth to a microphone.
It is. To do the job well and to be exceptional at it, it requires more than just saying someone's name and saying the score and time remaining. It's trying to find nuances that keep the broadcast entertaining and keep it informative. And being at the site allows you to see a lot more. So your insight, you're supposed to be the eyes and ears for the audience. And you can't quite be that if you're just calling it off a screen and seeing the same exact angle that a viewer is seeing. So while in theory you think, oh, big deal, just call it from a studio, there's not going to be much drop off. There is. Little things fall through the cracks, and just having a better feel for the event. The way that I view the job is you're a conduit between what's happening at the site and the people watching at home or in a bar or in a restaurant or at a friend's house, whatever it might be. And if you don't have all the information, how can you possibly do your job as well as is expected of you? So this is going to be an adjustment for a lot of people initially. The way the NBA is set up, I'll tell you that every local broadcast will be from their local market. If you're doing the Milwaukee Bucks, then you're doing it from Milwaukee. If ESPN and ABC get a chance to send a crew, I think they'll look to do that. Turner similar situation, but I don't think everybody is going down to Orlando. First of all, they don't want that many people there. They're trying to keep it tight so that they can monitor everybody and keep everybody safe. And then second, I think it's something that they're trying to see if for the future, and if this continues for a long time, is it feasible to call these games from a studio and still do a quality job?
All right.
Yeah.
So I looked down, I saw something on my phone. Mark Stein just tweeted this out. Former Net, Jason Kidd. The New York Knicks have just been granted permission from the Lakers for Jason Kidd to interview for that job. I mean, he used to coach the Nets. Do you think he would do a good job over there in New York?
I think he wants to be a head coach. There's no doubt about it. My sense of it, my opinion, is that he would want to walk into a good situation, meaning
not the Knicks.
Meaning a team that has enough talent to compete right now. Look, the Knicks is definitely a different feel than prior. Leon Rose has taken over as team president. They're trying to do things the right way. They're trying to view it from the perspective of this is not a quick fix.
Right.
Jason, at this stage of his life, I know just wants to be a head coach. He might have a choice. He could come up in the net possibilities. He could come up for Philadelphia if the Sixers decide to make a change. Jason did a very good job with the Nets and then went on to Milwaukee, was successful. For whatever reason, that thing fell apart. There might have been a little bit of a power struggle there as to the philosophy. Jason taking this assistant coaching job in LA showed that he was very serious about staying in the occupation and being a head coach one day. So I think he's going to have another chance. The Knicks, Tom Thibodeau is someone that's come up. Kenny Atkinson, the former Net coach, has come up in conversation. The Knicks seem to have cast a wider net, and they might be looking up to 12 candidates to see who's the best fit.
Yeah. All right. Now, this is the question we were going to ask you, was kind of your thoughts on the Nets. It seems like this season, and obviously this year has been really weird with the way it's now in Orlando, so anything can happen. But the way it looks like is this, at least this year might not be the year for the Nets, but they definitely, with Kyrie and KD next year, are going the right direction. What do you think about the Nets for maybe this year and the future?
Yeah, the reality is they had always circled 2020-21 because they knew that's when Kevin Durant would be healthy, and the pairing of Durant and Kyrie Irving, two guys that wanted to play with one another, trying to create the right mix and combination around them. That's been Sean Marks' goal, not just this year, but the last 3.5, 4 years, trying to create a culture that people wanted to be a part of. And what they've done is they've changed the way they're viewed around the NBA. That's not easy to do. That's very difficult. How do they do that? A few ways. One, the fact of the matter is people now around the league talk about the Nets as being a destination. That was never the case. They looked at Brooklyn as untapped potential, and if things went well there, it could really mushroom into something positive. Second, they built a lot of trust with players, with agents. That was a big key. I think that was a smart play by Sean Marks. He looked at the dynamic and relationship with agents as integral in changing the way that their persona is and to try to build an identity. The agents now looked at the Nets as a team that's willing to do business the right way. So what does that mean? Well, it means they treat your players right. It means they treat the players' families right as well. And don't take that lightly. That becomes a big deal for players when they feel comfortable that their families are welcome inside the facility or at the arena or on a team flight at the hotel, that it's a very different view from management's point of view. And that's what they did. And they developed talent. I mean, that might be the most important part of it. The fact that Joe Harris, Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, Jared Allen, all have gotten better the last 3 years. That speaks volumes. People look at that around the league and say, oh, wait a second. So that's where I can go and I can maximize my potential. I can get better, improve, polish my skills, and then get a bigger contract down the road. So I think all of those ingredients played a role. And obviously, KD and Kyrie gave them credibility. Now people around the league say, oh, wait a second. So the Nets are for real here. They're trying to win the whole thing. They're not just talking about what they're going to do one day. It's been pretty impressive to see. And for someone that's now been doing the games for 26 years, it was nice to see a plan put into action and to see them actually follow through and not cut corners.
Exactly what you just said is why I was so surprised they fired Kenny Atkinson, because it felt like they were going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Why did they fire him? Yeah.
I still don't know the answer. I was very surprised as well. My understanding of it is that Kenny was hearing some rumblings that he may not be in their future. So there was no plan to fire him during the season. But once he heard those rumblings, he went to management and said, hey, look, I want to have a meeting. I want to sit down. And in that meeting may have said, like, what's the deal? Am I in for next year? Because I'm doing all this work. I'm putting all this time in. I put blood, sweat, and tears in. And I want to know, am I going to get a chance to coach these guys when we start competing at the highest level? And the answer to that may have been, I can't guarantee that.
Right.
And that might have been enough for Kenny to say, hey, look, you don't want to guarantee that? I understand. But if you're not confident in what I'm doing, and if I'm not the right guy, then let's do this now, because that'll give me an opportunity to still be available for jobs around the NBA. And no hard feelings. We'll move on. So my sense is that's probably closer to the reality of what happened, that the Nets didn't really plan on it, but some conversations, some uncomfortable conversations took place, and maybe some decisions were made based on those conversations.
All right, that one, I guess that could be. Yeah, it was very surprising to me.
Agreed.
So yeah. All right. Another question we mentioned the Ray Allen shot as one of the moments you called. The other one was the Miami Miracle, and I'll tell you that now it's very messy over here, but right over there is where I was watching the Ravens Chiefs game. And I'm watching that game, and I have never seen this before or since, where in the huddle, they cut away to, you will not believe what just happened, and they showed the play. And weirdly enough, the next play for the Chiefs was that 4th and 9 heave by Mahomes that was not good. But what was it like for the Miami Miracle? Just call him that.
Yeah, the constant reminder that you should put into your brain as a play-by-play announcer is never assume a game is over. So in that particular case, this is just some background information. I think I had a tight flight, or Dan Fouts had a tight flight. One of us had a tight flight. I just knew we had to get out of there pretty quickly once the game ended. So prior to that play, I had taken my notes off the counter and put them in my bag just to save 11 seconds. I mean, it was a silly thing to do to begin with, and put them in my bag. That's where my mentality was. I had seen this over and over again in the NFL. Last ditch try, either a Hail Mary or lateral. Seen it, never ever seems to work. Usually it ends up in the hands of a big offensive lineman, and then funny things may happen and the ball squirts free, and that's the end. There's a scramble and the game ends. This one, Bill Belichick made the decision to send Rob Gronkowski into the game, and it struck me when I saw him trotting onto the field that, okay, they must be anticipating a Hail Mary, right? Because why else would Gronk be in there? Just to basically, like a basketball move, box out your man and knock the ball down. Well, they didn't do that.
Right.
They decided lateral. And as it's happening, it strikes me that Kenyon Drake could loop around to open space. And if you listen back to the call, it's building. At first, it sounds like a play-by-play announcer that's waiting to call the end of the game.
Right.
And then the realization, and it's different levels at that point. And then Gronkowski, I see him enter the picture and realize he's not going to get there. So to call that play, to be on top of it, to bring the proper emotion, it happened in Miami. So the fans that were left, most of them had gone. The fans that were left were stupefied. And it turned out to be one of the most incredible plays that I've ever seen in NFL history. I believe I did not deal with my phone until I got to the airport. We were in the car. We were still, very charged up about it, talking about it. And I got to the airport and I had 285 texts. And I knew that this one certainly was the lateral heard around the country.
Yeah. I think the way you said it too was that he didn't have the angle. Because it's true, because it had nothing to do with that Gronk was in the game. It was he had no chance to get there.
None.
And the fact that it was a tight end trying to make the tackle. He
that's
just
it.
couldn't get there.
Well, that's it. Maybe if it's a safety, if it's a linebacker and they're used to it, there's muscle memory in reacting in the moment.
Right.
He has no muscle memory in regards to having to bring down a running back in that situation. So it was bizarre. It was an incredible ending. And as we know, it didn't matter. The Patriots ended up winning the Super Bowl anyway that year. So go figure.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. So I want to know. I'm really, curious as to what your prep, what goes into. What's your prep like before the game for each sport you call? Can you give us a bit of a prep breakdown?
Yeah, for football, it's certainly the most time-consuming of the bunch, just because you have 53 players on a team, and the one game means so much, and so much effort is put into the game, not just from a broadcast standpoint, from the team standpoint. It's 1/16 of their season. It takes on so much meaning. So, the basics on your board, I'll have a spotting chart that I create by hand. It's name, it's uniform number, it's height, weight, age, how many years they've been in the league, what college they went to, how they were acquired, what year they were drafted, what round they were drafted in, and then background information. Have they been to the Pro Bowl? How many times? What teams have they played for prior? This is all information that needs to be there, and it has to be grabbed at a moment's notice. You don't want to search through your board. You don't want to have to leaf through pages. You want to be able to look down and know what you need when you need it. So a lot of that information, because I still write it out, is pounded into your head as you're writing it. But it is an expansive process. Then I'll get into scouting reports on players, background on what kind of player they are, and what are the adjectives that best describe them. And then any other personal stories that might factor in. All of that will be on one board, a football chart. And it'll be an offense and then the opposing team's defense, and you flip it, and it's the opposing team's offense and then the team's defense that you were talking about. Beyond that, I do another large manila folder with just notes on each team. And I'm talking about 35 notes for each team, then individual notes for each team, a section on the coaches, how many years they've done it, whose staffs they might have been on prior, what coaches have served under them that have become head coaches. You have to get into the nitty-gritty here, because you just never know. If you have a blowout, you're going to need information. If you have a great game, I might use 10 or 15% of that. In addition to that, we talked very early about the interviews that we do. And those interviews I will take, and then I'll move them into a format that's a little more digestible when we're on the air. I'll type out name and then a bullet point of what they had to say, and in a way that I can tell that story very quickly. And I'll do that for each player. So with Baltimore, we met with Lamar Jackson. We met with Mark Ingram. We met with John Harbaugh, so on and so forth. And you'll have a little section for each player or coach that you met with stories beyond it. Basketball, I have a board that I created, starting point guard, 2 guards, small forward, power forward, center on one side, their respective backups on the other, and then fill in the blanks with the other players. And there, same thing, height, weight, age, hometown, how many years have they been in the league, what school do they go to, what year were they drafted, how were they acquired, what's their contract situation, what other teams did they play for, and then get into more particulars about those players. Then on game day, I'll take an index card and I'll write down on each side of that index card the latest information on the team, notes on those teams, specific things I can use pregame, things I can use during the game, things that I want to go back to if the game gets away from us and it's a 20-point blowout. That's the key. The key is you got to have enough information to keep the broadcast moving, even if the play on the field or on the court is not all that enthralling.
Right. Very interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So the closing question that we asked to your son Noah, we asked to all of our broadcasters, and we love to hear what they have to say. What advice would you give to an aspiring sportscaster?
Well, what you're doing is the first piece of advice. You've got to go do it. If you have a chance, the way things are set up now in our world, you've got a camera right there. Each of you have a camera. You have your own mini studio, and you can work at this on a daily basis. You can record yourself. You can look back at it. You can critique your own work. You can polish your skills. So that's the first part of it. You have to actually go out and do it. I'm not saying that you've got to do it every single day from the age of 10 years old all the way through until you go to college. But if you can get practice, it does help. Reps help. The second part, and this is a really important part, you do have to change the way that you view and listen to sports. If you're truly interested in doing this one day, you got to start paying attention to other things in the broadcast. You can still be a fan. That's at the backbone of all of this. Right. The passion that it requires to do this and the knowledge. From a fan standpoint, there are a lot of people that know their stuff and have passion. But now how do you distinguish yourself? Well, by being very well spoken and articulate, by knowing your stuff, by speaking with confidence, and by being able to perform in the moment. Watching others do it is a great way to learn. So when you watch a broadcast now, really watch with a critical eye or listen with a critical ear. When you watch SportsCenter or when you listen to your favorite talk show, you got to do it now with the idea that one day you want to do this. One day this is a job that you would like to have and a career that you'd like to pursue. So jot down notes if need be, what you like about a broadcaster, what you don't like, just so when you're put in that position, you can refer to those and remember what it is you'd like to be when you get your opportunity to do it. That's really important. And then third, I would say this to anyone that's young, that is interested in trying to improve themselves for the future, but how you treat people and how you connect with people, that's still an important part. This is a communications business. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to look people in the eye and connect with them. And you have to find common ground. And maybe now more than ever, considering what's going on in our country, you just have to be kind. You have to be a good person. There's no reason not to be that way. And the people that come up with excuses and continue to complain about all the reasons they've been wronged and how they got screwed over by this person, it's not productive. So if you take all those things that we talked about, going out and doing it, listening and consuming and watching, and then really being magnanimous in your life, there's a pretty good chance you'll find a role in this position. But you do have to figure out how to connect with people, and you do have to understand the big picture here, that now more than ever, there are more people that want to do this than ever before. It is a fun job. It's a really fun job, but it's very competitive as well.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah,
Thank you very
I'll
much.
tell you this.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys.
I'll
Great
tell
to
you this,
do it.
Ian, that we've had one interview other than this one go longer than 40 minutes. We are now over an hour.
And this is very fun too.
Yeah, no, it is.
Josh, Michael, Luke, really appreciate it. I know we've been talking about this for a few weeks since my son Noah was on, so I'm glad we finally got the chance to do it.
Oh, yeah.
I hope you guys have a tremendous summer. I know things are weird and things are different, but still try to be productive and see if you can do something of value that you can look back on and say, okay, I made the most of that time, and just prepare yourself for what's to come. You've got bright futures in front of you, so take advantage of all these opportunities that come your way.
Thank you. And this interview is a great way to start a good summer.
Yeah,
It was a
thanks,
great
guys.
interview. Really enjoyed it. Yeah.
My pleasure.
There we